world now knew where Gander was, where this giant airport was.
He called it his first ever Winterland excursion.
We've seen technology change. We've seen our relevance rise and wane. That's the ebb and flow of Gander.
What's happening? With the Stasi intervene, there was fear.
They all wanted to stay in Canada.
One of the greatest assets is the resilience of our Newfoundland people, our burning desire to be here and to stay here.
For 80 years, people have been flying across the North Atlantic. During that time, a place in Newfoundland, Canada, has been one of the most important reference points for all pilots. Gander. This is the control center for all flights over the North Atlantic. From here, every single flight is monitored around the clock. Every day, within a few hours, about 1,500 planes fly over the Canadian island.
Nobody knew how extensive this terrorism was. Were some of those oceanic transatlantic flights going to be hit? I started my shift on that morning at 8 o'clock. It was a beautiful fall day, sunny day. Everything was going normal until the action started.
Don O'Brien is on duty on the morning of September the 11th, 2001, when terrorists executed their attacks in New York and Washington.
The U.S. Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA, they shut down the American airspace.
For aircraft over the North Atlantic, this means they are no longer allowed to approach their destination.
Some of them were around the halfway point. They turned back, went back to Europe. There was a couple hundred airplanes coming on. So you're telling an airline, you're landing Gander, and the airline is coming back at you. No, we're going to Chicago. No, you're not. Some of them needed a bit of convincing, but you had to be hard line and very assertive. You're landing. We'll explain it on the ground.
Charlie Golf, Sierra Mike, Romeo, Gander Tower, good day.
38 large passenger jets change course and now fly towards Gander. Within half an hour, the airfield is completely blocked.
And then it was over. It went from madness to nothing. And there was no movement after they all got in. The airspace was sterilized. It was quiet. It was eerily quiet.
In 1936, the Gander International Airport didn't exist. A pilot in northern Newfoundland lands his seaplane in a deep-cut bay. He started a reconnaissance flight with 2 passengers. The pilot, Douglas Fraser, knows his way around. Flights could fly west towards Gander Lake, which was then part of a British government area. At that time, Newfoundland was a semi-independent dominion. The importance of this exploration became nothing less than the future of aviation. He was directed to find a landing site for transatlantic flights. The region north of the lake seemed promising. It was flat, far enough away from the Atlantic Ocean, and near the only railway line in Newfoundland. From here, aircraft had the shortest connection from Europe to America in their flight across the Atlantic. This led to the birth of Gander.
It was kind of in the middle of nowhere. It was only known as Hattie's Camp, which was for trappers and loggers. It was a temporary area. So they immediately did start to clear the land, flatten anything that needed to be flattened, and prepare it so that they would be able to have runways in this space.
For construction of the airfield, everything had to be flown into this remote location. There were no laborers or equipment to turn a forest into an airfield. A new town without prior history was created.
Areas in Newfoundland, so many towns and cities, were established back in the 16, 17, even 1800s as fishing communities. Gander is new.
4 runways are under construction at the same time. In January 1938, the first one is finished, and it is Captain Fraser who lands for the first time on the snow-covered runway. Everything seems ready to receive flights coming across the Atlantic. But then, war breaks out in Europe. Hitler's attack on Poland will soon have an indirect impact on Newfoundland. When France falls in the summer of 1940, Great Britain urgently needs supplies from America. Weapons and airplanes are needed to survive the German assault. The new airport at Gander Lake quickly becomes the linchpin for supplies.
Shipping them meant that you would have to build the aircraft, test it, take it apart, put it in crates, load them up on ships, brave the waters of the North Atlantic, which had quite a few U-boats. So even traveling in convoys, which were supposed to protect the ships, there were quite a few ships that were lost to the U-boats in the Atlantic.
In 1940, a test flight with a twin-engine Hudson bomber is flown under the direction of Australian pilot Donald Bennett.
Bennett was given 7 Hudsons that he refitted so that they would have extra fuel tanks to be able to make the hop from Gander overseas. And he hand-selected pilots. He made sure he had very good pilots for this. And they left from Gander. Now, this was 7 Hudsons, and from the English point of view, if 3 of them successfully made the flight, then they would start ferrying aircraft rather than shipping them.
Bennett leaves Gander on the evening of November the 10th, 1940. The convoy hits a patch of bad weather, and contact is lost to 3 Hudsons. To the surprise and relief of everyone, all 7 aircraft land in Belfast the next day. After the U.S. enters the war in June 1941, Gander becomes a central air hub. Runways are widened, new hangars are built, and ever larger aircraft arrive and depart.
So during the Second World War, before this was known as Gander, this was the Newfoundland Airport. They actually called it an airport in the wilds of Newfoundland. So the location for Gander itself, for the Newfoundland Airport, was top secret. If you wanted to access Gander, you had to have special permission to arrive, to get off the train at Gander.
The number of bombers landing here continues to increase until the end of the war. In total, around 20,000 fighter aircraft will be transported to Europe via Gander. And then, the war is over.
The Second World War was very much the catalyst that put Gander on the map. The world now knew where Gander was, where this giant airport was, that so many aircraft were leaving from to go overseas. And after the war, being that hub of commercial aviation, being the crossroads of the world, so many people landed in Gander, so they knew Gander, but they didn't really know where it was because it was still kind of considered to be in the middle of nowhere.
After the war, the military abandons the airbase, along with the planes. Gander's population shrinks from about 10,000 to 2,000 inhabitants. For some, it feels like the end of Gander. But civil aviation has recognized people's need for a rapid transatlantic link and has not forgotten the airport at the end of the world. As early as autumn 1945, the first scheduled aircraft in Gander lands for refueling. Since Chicago and New York are linked to European capitals, Gander becomes the stopover for all scheduled flights. Even Belgian Sabena Airlines, with its 4-engine DC-4 propeller machines, uses Gander en route from Brussels to New York. In September 1946, a tragic accident occurs. On this day, visibility is poor, and a flight with 44 passengers travels off course, just a few kilometers away from Gander. Due to unclear circumstances, the DC-4 goes down in the middle of a forest. To this day, the wreckage at the crash site is still virtually unchanged.
The Sabena crash was the largest commercial air disaster at the time. It was important to the world because everyone was watching the rescue effort.
Rescue planes searched deep in the heart of the Newfoundland wilds for the Belgian transatlantic transport which crashed with 44 passengers.
There were survivors, some severely injured who urgently needed help.
Where it was found was so isolated that it was going to be difficult to try and rescue the survivors. So what they ended up doing here in Gander, they brought in helicopters, and helicopters were not very reliable at the time. They were actually crated up and flown in to Gander. Then they had to be put back together so that they could fly to the site. But the helicopters had known difficulties with their tail rotors. They couldn't just fly directly to the crash site. They had to move all of the survivors to a plateau where they built a landing pad for the helicopter.
Many survivors are rescued. But the crash of the Belgian airplane, as well as the dangerous rescue efforts, show how risky the aviation business can be.
When the Newfoundland Rangers came 2 weeks after the crash to bury those who died, nothing was in a very good state at that point. It was a very warm September. The bodies were heavily decomposed. And one of the reports from the Rangers, they said it was so bad that they radioed back to Gander and had a crate of rum dropped on site. And they would build a fire and they would drink until they were drunk enough that they felt they could actually handle the remains.
The graves of the 26 dead are right next to the wreck of the Sabena.
There were a few diamond merchants who were on this aircraft. Some of them were going to a diamond expo. Now, there have been rumors spread that the plane was full of diamond merchants and so many diamonds that were on the aircraft, but it was actually a mixed group of folks. There are a lot of stories around Gander as to where those diamonds might be. I've heard the stories of people who have gone out to the Sabina site and then come back into Gander and left. So maybe they found something out there and used those newfound riches to leave and go somewhere else.
Legends and commemoration of these and other disasters in Gander continue. The population soon feels connected to everything that arrives from the world. The flight operations continue to develop steadily. Newfoundland has been Canadian since 1949, and the major airlines of that time regularly land at the airport located in the middle of nowhere.
TWA, Pan American, I mean, they were in regularly when I was a kid, regularly. And you got to remember that they landed right across from your house. I mean, you could look out your window and here he was. We were 2 houses away from the blacktop. And when I came out my door, I would say I could take probably 30 or 40 good-sized steps and I'd be almost out on the edge of the runway with no fence, no nothing. It was fascinating to see what it took to get these old-fashioned piston engines going. Matter of fact, they sounded so violent when they were starting and backfiring and flames flashing out of them that they had to have a guy with a big fire, I guess the fire extinguisher was probably 4 or 5 feet high on wheels, and he had to stand by it in case an engine caught on fire every time they started a piston engine.
Gander is considered the most important international aviation hub in the 1950s. These are golden times. The airlines come to this large airport located in the middle of nowhere because they need to refuel. They also bring passengers from all over the world, even if for only a brief stop. Flying is mainly for the privileged at this time.
The biggest thing you'd see between 1959 and today, simply that passenger traffic has evolved so differently. In 1959, travel was the prerogative of the rich. You needed to be extremely wealthy. Aircraft couldn't fly far. They flew with very few passengers. No one had a private jet in 1959. So Humphrey Bogart and all the A-listers from Hollywood and the heads of state, they all flew commercial like the rest of us, which was a wonderful backdrop if you were growing up in Gander because you could commingle with people like that.
In 1959, Gander expects an exceptionally important and high-profile visit. Queen Elizabeth II arrives to inaugurate the new terminal. She is duly received and drives in an open car through the small town next to the runway. The new terminal is considered to be an architecturally modern arrivals hall, which is open to the public. In Gander, everyone is proud. But the arrivals hall meets an airport whose operations have already reached its maximum point. In these years, the residents of Gander are facing a significant transition. The town, which is a few kilometers from the airport, is completely rebuilt. Gone are the days of barracks next to the runway. But things are about to change. Planes evolve, and jet engines allow aircraft to fly directly to European and American cities, and are no longer required to stop in Gander for fuel. Passengers now fly directly from Europe to America and back again. A crisis in Gander looms. But in 1964, the airport gets a new boss, Jack James.
We started losing them. I remember my dad became the airport general manager in '64, and I was in high school, and I started noticing him talking about how the flights were dropping off at Gander Airport.
With a problem that was anticipated, Jack James has the task of finding a way for Gander to survive. They decided to win over new customers with discounts and special services, and bring back those who did not just land for refueling.
They targeted the East Bloc countries because a lot of those flights were coming through going to Cuba. They set up a program with the airlines where they could actually transfer crews to live in Gander.
As a matter of fact, airlines from Eastern Bloc countries still have a problem with the distance. For example, the way to Cuba is far, and Tupolev's and Aleutians use too much fuel to make the trip non-stop. Aeroflot, Interflug, Cubana, and others stationed their crews in Gander. The isolated location of the airport may also have played an important role in the midst of the Cold War.
Jack was huge. Jack James was like an ambassador for the airport. He was a unique individual. I guess in a sense, the airport was Jack James. Yeah, Jack felt that this was his home. This belonged to him personally. So it was, he didn't come to work. He never left the airport. He was here 24/7 if he needed to be. Yeah, so this was Jack's home. This was his love, right?
However, every year when winter comes, managing the airport in Newfoundland is a challenge. Temperatures fall far below zero, and snow covers the runway for months. Christmas 1972. Cubana Airlines lands with Fidel Castro on board in order to refuel in Gander. A blizzard forces him to extend his stay, and Jack James meets the president of Cuba for the first time.
When he landed in a winter wonderland. The eastern seaboard was down in snow and visibility was bad. They couldn't get an alternate there. When they landed, they got delayed here because of the weather. I guess first thing they did was they went and had a bite to eat. The interpreter, he thought it was going to be harder to communicate with them, but it wasn't. It was like they knew each other. This picture is when they were sort of sizing up, I guess, the hill that he either just went down, how foolish he was, or they're thinking about going down. I'm not sure which it was. But if you look carefully, he has his own people all surrounded around him. They asked if they could borrow a toboggan, a wooden toboggan, that a girl had been going down on. I'm not sure if she knew who he was on laughter. It's hard to say. He got quite a distance down before he fell off. And he tipped over. One of his security people went over and grabbed him and tried to help him up. He was actually enjoying it. He called it his first ever winterland excursion.
Over the years, Jack James and Fidel Castro developed a good relationship during their many meetings.
Meeting Fidel and getting to know him personally, it kind of opened up a freedom for them. And they saw that, I guess, and he provided a trust. And I guess that was the big thing, was a trust that he developed with these countries was key to our airport.
Jack James had the right strategy for doing business with Eastern Bloc countries. After the Soviets built offices for their airlines, other nations soon followed. In the early 1970s, the world was in the middle of the Cold War, making the encounters in Gander even more unusual. Nowhere else in the world does such direct and uncomplicated East-West contact take place.
That was a very prolific time for this airport. And when the transit visas were introduced, it was a big change. I think Aeroflot had like 60 flights a week here at one point. Crew here. There was all kinds of espionage happening in town. When the sugar trade with Havana was still an important thing, so Gander's always been a little bit cosmopolitan like that.
At the same time, the West has not forgotten Gander. In 1974, the airport becomes part of aviation history. The first supersonic airliner in the world, the Concorde, is set to fly their test flights from Europe to Gander. They want to find out how people react to the effect of entering supersonic speed as well as slowing down again. residents of Gander are selected as test subjects to determine the comfort of the Concorde on round-trip flights from Gander to Europe. On one day in 1974, the British Concorde flies back and forth to England twice. The sensation and rising popularity of the sleek new supersonic aircraft reinvigorates the status of Gander, and the world takes note of it. This happens in the West, but also beyond the Iron Curtain. Politicians and strategists of both sides of the Cold War conduct business in Gander. But the airport also becomes an important hub for the disempowered and disenfranchised, the victims of the world. The flights that are offered from the Eastern Bloc countries to Havana are a unique opportunity for those who want to flee to the West, as of course, there is always a layover here.
We could possibly have 20 or 30 a week defectors. I wouldn't say every flight, but a lot of flights would come through and have defectors.
There was a female doctor that had defected, and she came up and asked the police officer for asylum. And right after she asked, Cubana was getting wise then, so they would send security guards on every flight. And so they grabbed her and pulled her up by the hair over the stairs, over the only escalator in Gander at the airport. And the police officers intervened, said, no, she's asked for asylum. She's part of Canada now. She's covered under Canadian law, and they had to let her go. And it was very traumatic for her. I talked to her after, and she thought she was going to die, because if they had gotten her back on the airplane, she would have ended up somewhere and she would have been made an example of.
Even in the German Democratic Republic, it was secretly rumored that there is an opportunity in Gander to escape to the West.
I had no experience and no idea if anybody had ever been successful, so I just simply improvised. The airplane lands. We were told to go into the transit room. I grabbed my bag, and immediately a stewardess said, "You do not need to take a handbag. Leave it here, please." I said, "No, I will not. My valuables are in there. I want to change now. It'll be cold in Berlin." That was the excuse we used to take out our handbag. And we had learned a phrase to seek asylum: "Save me."
Save me. When you came to this airport, you weren't technically on Canadian soil. You were still in foreign land, right? So unless they indicated that they wanted to stay in Gander, they were on foreign land. This was a complete sterile area. So even though they left the airplane to come to the lounge, they still were connected to the airplane.
She had immediately seen someone wearing the uniform. She went there and said, "Save me."
In the historic arrivals hall, Wolfgang Jorn and his girlfriend choose to take a risk towards freedom.
I wasn't here very long when, I was trained as what to do if I did get somebody approach me. Sometimes they couldn't speak English. They would just hand you off a piece of paper and you'd read it, and they were frightened to death.
There was fear. What's happening now? Will the Stasi intervene? At that moment, I must say, I was scared to death. The officer then took her to his office. I followed them. He noticed me and thought I was a Stasi official, but she then explained that I was a friend. I had left my bag in one of the seat rows.
But at the same time, the room is full of Stasi spies.
I went back to the seating area. It was completely quiet in this big room. Everyone had heard what was happening. I leaned over, grabbed my bag, and It took all my courage, and I said, for me, the journey is over here.
Die Fahrt jetzt hier zu Ende.
Wolfgang Johann would never return to Germany. To this day, he lives near Toronto.
My name is Wolfgang.
I'm Harry. Sometimes there would be one, sometimes there would be a family. And I know at one time I was approached by a man and a woman and a child, and I made a call to the RCMP to meet me. And I start to walk up the lower finger there in the airport to bring them up. And I don't know how many was behind me. It was probably 25 or 30 people that I had that they all wanted to stay in Canada.
It was Harry Morgan's first week of service when Wolfgang Johann fled in 1988.
It was very far from my world, like very, very far, yeah. And, you know, you could see them being so scared. And I think they even got more scared once after they approached me, they see a big, tall, you know, police officer coming towards them, because you even had help that they wanted sometimes, but they would say, but please, no police, no police. But that was the only way they could actually be processed here.
In addition to civilian passenger and cargo machines, Gander has long served the U.S. military as an important transportation hub. It was here that U.S. soldiers on transportation aircraft would stop on the long flight back home. On December 12, 1985, a major catastrophe occurs at the airport. We're talking to Wayne Lawrenson, who possibly was the last air traffic controller to speak to the pilot.
No chance. Nobody survived.
With 248 passengers on board, flight Aero Air 1285 crashes directly after takeoff.
Everything melted. Aircraft aluminum, rims in the tires, brakes, all melted.
The crash raises many questions. A commission is put together in order to reconstruct the moments before the disaster.
I'm an international flight service specialist. My job is to relay information, completely 100% accuracy with zero chance of error. I was working a midnight shift, and we had a message came in for the Aero Air 1285 while I was sitting on the ground. And I talked to the pilot, and I gave him a company message. The company message turns out to be very significant in terms of my involvement and the data that was transferred, because it involved the zero fuel weight, balances of the aircraft, total fuel, passengers. So there were a lot of numbers there that any particular number that could have been out of sequence or given incorrectly could have had a significant impact that caused the accident. It was towards the end of my midnight shift. We heard that he crashed, and we left work, and we could look and see the rising smoke, and we just sat there in silence. We couldn't believe it.
Only a few hundred meters from the runway, the machine crashes into the forest.
It's one's nature in terms of what happened with that circumstance to doubt if I had given him that message correctly.
The commission investigating the accident tries to make sense of the sparse findings to share some information with the press.
The evidence indicates, that the first portion of the aircraft to strike the trees and ground was the tail section. Of course, after that impact, a large-scale fire ensued. I listened to the tapes myself, but I have been...
So there was a lot of anxiety for me and a lot of pain and anguish in that process, to the point where I was interviewed and I was finally cleared that I did give him the message accurately and he had received it accurately.
The Aero Air case is a disaster for many who live in Gander. There were two reasons for this. The cause of the crash could never be explained, and there were no survivors. In addition to this tragedy, There were other challenges for the people of Gander. At the beginning of the 1990s, fewer and fewer international airlines are landing here.
It was a gradual thing over a short period of time, but it didn't just happen overnight, but you knew it was coming. I remember when the Cubana management and even the Aeroflot management were leaving for good. It was a sad time because we developed a bond with them. They were like family to us. You know, the airport community was very close knit. So yeah, it was a very sad time for all of us at the airport.
For a decade, Gander International Airport sinks into obscurity. Hardly anyone takes notice of the airport in Newfoundland until the world is shocked by terrorists on September the 11th, 2001.
We heard about the towers in New York City being hit. So a few of us that were free went to the TV room to have a look at it. And as we're looking, we're saying what a tangle U.S. airspace is going to be in with airplanes and the tangle air traffic controllers in New York were into. And shortly after, we got the word that airplanes were going to be landing Gander.
At the time of the attacks, air traffic controllers expected 38 passenger jets to land. Only half an hour until the first planes expected.
These airplanes were getting tight, and landing, and they wanted to, a lot of those pilots were apprehensive. They wanted to get out of the sky as quick as they could. You could tell in their voices. They didn't know what they were going to be hit. Nobody knew at that point.
At Patrick White's flight school, near the end of a partially closed runway, no one is aware of the terrorist attacks. The numerous Cessnas with flight students and teachers on board had to land immediately and clear the runway.
Well, I'm sure if I can use the words that I used that day, but someone just came to me and said the control tower said that we have to take out the aircraft, and I said, well, tell them to forget it. So I just thought it was some foolish regulatory thing, and so therefore I said, no, we're not taking our aircraft down. Like, why would I do that? That's crazy.
After the second try, the tower gets a hold of Pat White directly, and this time he follows orders and lands the aircraft. Meanwhile, the first jets are already preparing to land.
I went up on the roof of the building. There was a line of aircraft as far as you could see, and from my eyes, I could see the pattern that they were doing to come in to land. Like, that was just amazing.
On the radar recordings of September the 11th, 2001, the unique landing route of the aircraft arriving in Gander is recognizable.
It's first come, first served. So whoever's closest gets in first, and we give turns, radar vectors we call them. So we give radar vectors around to an airplane, bring them in behind, and like I said, we can run them legally 3 miles apart. It was gridlock on the ground. The tower had big prime problems parking those airplanes and getting them off the runway.
At this time, it is not clear whether terrorists are also on board any of these aircraft.
You didn't have time to reflect on, is there another one of these airplanes going to blow? Or whatever. You just had to push on and get through it without incident.
I was off that day, and I woke up and I turned on the TV and I seen the news on the TV. So then I come on into work, and I'd look out over the runway and I could see plane after plane after plane. We're looking at 30-odd airplanes. We've only got about 6 passenger stairs, and each one required a passenger stairs. So we'd have to take stairs to one airplane, take it off that one, go to another one, and we just kept the rotation going and going and going.
Passengers had to wait up to 25 hours inside of the airplanes in order for authorities to clear all security concerns.
Well, we knew we had 38 wide bodies, and we did some math. We figured at least 200 on each one of them. So we knew we'd be somewhere in the range of 5,000 to 8,000 people that would be, on those planes. And with only 500 hotel rooms.
The next day, passengers are finally allowed to get off the planes, only with their hand luggage. They will be greeted by the people of Gander with food and drinks.
It was just unreal. And they came in, it was in the early hours in the morning. And I took some over to the hotel to make phone calls. I brought them back, took some more people over. And the second trip I made, there was 3 ladies. And one of them, when she hung up the phone talking to her mother, she broke down crying. And from then on, I was taking people for showers, taking them to the mall shopping, and whatever needed to be done, that's what I was doing.
The people in Gander open their doors to the stranded. There are about 8,000 inhabitants living here, and they will voluntarily provide refuge for about the same number of people.
When they came, they were scared. All you had to do was put yourself in their shoes and think about how you would feel.
The generosity of people on an otherwise detrimental day inspires 2 composers to write a musical about it. Come From Away. This emotional piece of music would become a 2003 Broadway success.
It was released at the right time when there's a lot of turmoil, and American people especially are grasping onto this story, and they just love to hear it, and they're so overwhelmed with it that it's amazing, and yet it's simple. It's about love and compassion. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with everybody. We don't have to agree on issues. We don't have to agree with the way we live our lives, but we should all be able to agree to love each other.
After 5 days, the bittersweet farewell. Many of the passengers will never forget the little place of Gander and the warmth with which they were received here.
On that last day, when everybody left, it was somber. It was, people were, there was people sad, people were just not knowing what to do. It was like you just laid to rest your best friend, and you're just in a daze. And the whole community was like that for a few days after, till we, as everybody was tired and finally got some sleep and everything. But it was like you lost a big part of your family.
When the guests are gone, reality returns to Gander. This town, as well as the airport, was built for a world where Gander was the key hub between Europe and America. Many in Gander find it difficult to accept that this time will never return. The place at the end of the world with its lovely inhabitants must absolutely reinvent itself once again.
Yeah, I grew up here. Gander, this airport was the backdrop for my youth. Aviation is in everyone's DNA in Gander, so I understood the history and the expectations of people. The only time it bothers me is if someone believes that the past is more important than the future. We continue to sit here and rue the fact that the golden age of transatlantic travel is long gone. That makes history drag behind you like an anchor, when what we need is sails to the future.
Gander International Airport is now an airport that primarily serves small passenger planes, private jets, regional Canadian airlines, cargo planes, and military aircraft. A major and important employer at the airport is the Canadian Air Traffic Control Centre for the North Atlantic and Canada, called NAV Canada. All flights that come over the North Atlantic are recorded and tracked in Gander. Twice a day, the sky looks like a busy highway with heavy rush hour traffic. Each airliner has, of course, a given speed and altitude. If any deviation occurs during a flight, the Gander air traffic controllers can observe this on their monitors and clarify any issues with the pilots. In total, around 300 highly qualified air traffic controllers work in around-the-clock shifts. Gander has found a wide range of clients to service at its airport. A permanent squadron of the rescue service is stationed here.
One of the greatest assets that we have, I believe, in Gander is the resilience of our Newfoundland people and our innovation and our burning desire to be here and to stay here and to prosper here. So therefore now, when we see opportunities, we see them in a global sense.
Patrick White and his flight school represents what may become the future of Gander. His students encompass a part of the aviation passion that has characterized this place for so long.
My family is actually from Gander. I love Newfoundland and the history that Gander has here with aviation. There's not many other schools that have the same history.
The truth is that this is a cold, sometimes wet place with snow and ice and wind, and quite a challenging piece of geography to operate aircraft in and so on. And many people around the world will tell you, if you learn how to fly in this part of the world, then you will be a very proficient pilot.
So the top of the wing is curved and the bottom is somewhat flat. But looked at a basic aircraft...
Wayne Lawrenson is now teaching at the flight school. Many of his student pilots come from all over the world in order to train in extreme weather conditions.
Angle of attack, the angle of the wing compared to the relative airflow or the dynamic airflow in the static. So what is causing this aircraft to that dynamic pressure of the aircraft going through the air? Wind goes over the top of the wing, static. You have a static source. And even on warm days, I don't regret going to work and see the looks on students and see them develop and start to talk like pilots. That's when I first noticed that I was doing my job well. When they would start their ground school lessons, they would just talk about generalities, and then they start talking aviation. They were becoming aviators and becoming the same type of person I've been for most of my life. You know, and that's what I love about Gander.
It's usually really windy. We will always have a crosswind, no matter what landing. It's very rare that we get to land with no crosswind, but it makes for really good training. You experience everything. You will have a chance to fly in every single condition, which you don't get if you go somewhere that always has perfect weather.
In this latest transition, it is Patrick White's flight school that is bringing in new generations of pilots who are passionate about learning to fly.
I was kind of concerned when I first started because I was scared I wasn't going to like it as much as I thought I did. But the first flight I went on, just the feeling of the plane lifting off from the ground, it's just this crazy feeling. And the fact that you're the one that's doing it. This is it. There's nothing else.
there's always been an existential crisis among this community and the people who live here that something bad was going to happen. There were people here around lunchrooms in the early 60s that were waiting for the airport to close. Today, there's still murmurs occasionally about the airport closing. It has always been like that because we've seen customers come and go, we've seen technology change, we've seen our relevance rise and wane. That's the ebb and flow of Gander. There has always been anxiety, to some extent or another, about the airport's future. I would like to come to work on a day when there's no such anxiety. And if we do the right things, take the right risks, be smart about it, we can have that day. My dream.